Operators in JavaScript. So we looked at mathematical operators in a previous video. We learned how to use plus and minus, multiplication and division, right? But in this video, we're going to take a look at some other kinds of operators. And these are operators that you would use to test for equality, to test for greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, etc. The reason that we use these operators is to do some logic with our programs. And so the first of these operators that we're going to look at are the operators that look for equality and relationships between numbers. So this is all going to surround a particular kind of value in JavaScript, and that is a Boolean value. Okay? A Boolean is a fancy way of saying true or false. Now, a true or false value in a computer is basically just an on or off switch, and you can sort of think of it that way. And sometimes what we need to do is make decisions based on whether particular statements are true or false. And we use these conditional operators, the operators that we're going to look at today, in order to make those kinds of decisions. So the first thing that we need to do is talk about equality. So we looked at how to assign values to variables. So I'm going to assign a value to a variable x, and we use that single equal sign. We also looked at how to, let's say I'm going to assign a value to variable y, using that single equal sign. But now what if I want to test for equality between those two variables? Let's say I don't know for sure what the numbers are in these variables. Maybe this is something that a user has entered into a prompt box or something like that. How do I test for equality? Well, in JavaScript, we use, I'm going to log this out to the console, you use a double equal sign. So if I type this in, if I type x double equals y, then what I'm doing is I'm checking to see whether x is equal to y. And if I run this, I get false, because of course 9 is not equal to 10. Now if I change x to 10 and y to 10 and I run this, I get true. And so what this is doing is it's taking these two variables that have been assigned the integer values, and it's checking them for equality. Now, here's a little quirk of JavaScript. Check this out. Let's say that instead of setting x to the number 10, I set it to the string 10, and I check for equality between the string 10 and the number 10. Now watch this. When I run it, it'll say true, because JavaScript will automatically take this string and treat it as an integer. Okay? Now, there's a way around this, and there's a way to keep JavaScript from treating it that way, and that's to use what's called the strict equality operator. It's 3 equal signs. So if I use 3 equal signs when I'm comparing the string 10 to the integer 10, I actually get a false value, because an integer and a string are not actually the same thing. But if I'm just using the 2 equal signs, JavaScript assumes that you wanted to convert the string 10 to the integer 10 when you're doing this equality. So just keep that in mind. This isn't something that you'll run into every day, but it could be a place where you find some problems in your programs. Okay, so the other thing that JavaScript can do is it can look for greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to values. So in this case, I'm logging whether or not x is greater than y. And in this case, x is indeed greater than y. So when I run this, it logs the Boolean value true. If I log is x less than y and I run this, it logs the Boolean value false. Now, I can also ask if x is greater than or equal to y. In this case, it will, of course, log the value true. And if I change y to 10, it will, again, log the value true. Okay? So I can do the same thing with is x less than or equal to y. You just do the less than sign and then the equal sign. You log that value, and you get the value true because x is less than or equal to y. If I change y's value to 9 and I run this, of course I'll get the value false because now x is no longer less than or equal to y. So that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty straightforward mathematical operators. Now, another thing you can check for, since you can check for equality, you can also check for lack of equality. And you can use the not equal to symbol. Not in most programming languages is noted by an exclamation point. And so in this case, not equal to is exclamation point equal to. So if I run this, I get true because in this case, x is not equal to y. If I were to change this so that the two values are equal and I press run, I get a false value. Now this not symbol is actually a logical operator. And these logical operators can be used in a lot of different cases in your code. Let's say, for example, that you're creating an inventory for a character in an RPG. And you set a couple of variables. And we're going to say, we're going to have a variable that checks to see whether the character has a sword. And we'll have another variable that checks to see whether the character has a shield. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to set these to number values, so we're going to set these values to Boolean values. Okay? And we have a variable has sword is true, and the character does not yet have the shield, so that variable is false. And so what we want to do is we want to know whether that character is able to access a dungeon that requires that the character has both a sword and a shield. And so what we can do is actually set up a logical statement that asks whether or not that is the case. And so we're going to log out the result of this statement. And we use for this a logical operator. There are two logical operators that are commonly used in JavaScript. The first is an AND operator, and it's two ampersand signs. Okay. The second is an OR operator, and it's two pipes. The pipe is located usually just below your backspace key, your delete key. It's just straight up and down. It's not, don't confuse it with an L or a 1. It's the straight up and down line that's on the same key on your keyboard as the backslash, just usually below the delete key or right above the enter key. And so if I want to make sure that my hero has both a sword and a shield, I would ask, does the hero has sword and has shield? If this statement, has sword and has shield, evaluates to true, and the only way that it will evaluate to true is if the character has both the sword and the shield, then I'm going to log out a true statement, a true here. So right now, since one is true and one is false, this actually logs as false. But if, say, my hero has picked up the shield, and has sword is true and has shield is true, this will log to true. Okay? Now let's imagine that it's an easier dungeon, and I just want to make sure that my character is either protected by a shield or has the sword so he can slash at his enemies. In that case, I use the OR condition. So if has sword is false and has shield is true, I run this condition, has sword or has shield, and this will output true. If my character is just starting out and doesn't have either a sword or a shield, then it'll output false. So basically for the AND condition, if the only way that the AND condition is true is if both values are true. For the OR condition, it's true if either or both values are true. So the only case in which the OR condition is false is if both of the values are false. Now, the other thing that you can do here is create some more complicated statements. So if I want to know whether my character has the sword and the shield, and whether the character has completed the first dungeon, I can set a third variable here. And so even if, in this case, even if my character has both the sword and the shield, right? This statement here, has sword and shield, will evaluate to true. But then it'll be compared with first dungeon complete, which right now is false because I have not yet completed the first dungeon. And so in this case, this log statement will log out false because these two evaluate to true, this one evaluates to false, and for this and statement will end up evaluating to false. So you can see that it logs false. And you can create statements that are as complex as you would like them to be. So what you have to do when you create these statements is you have to basically evaluate whatever is in the parentheses first, and then evaluate the things that are outside of the parentheses. Now, let's imagine that instead of has sword and has shield, let's add a little complexity here. So I'm going to use a not statement, and I'm going to put the not statement before has sword and has shield in parentheses. And so what I do here in order to solve this problem is I evaluate has sword and has shield first. And when I evaluate that, that's going to evaluate to true, right? Because we both have the sword and have the shield. Then I apply that not statement, right? I apply the not operator to the value true. And what that does is it literally says not true, which makes that value false. My first dungeon complete variable is false. And so if I'm logging false and false, I actually, the result of my log statement will be false. So if you have some complicated problems like the ones that you're going to see in the exercise for this section, like, let's just do something random here, false or true, and true and true. All you have to do is start by working within the parentheses, solve those problems, and then solve the rest of the statements. So false or true, this will evaluate to true because in an or case, if one of the variables is true, if one of the sides of the or are true, then the or statement is true. And then I do my other parenthesis, true and true, evaluates to true. But then I apply my nots. So I've got a false. I apply another not here, get another false. And then I apply my and statement, and I get a false. And so the end result of that long statement is actually false. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully you can see how to work through some of these problems and how to use these Boolean operators and a little bit of logic in your programs as we move forward. So go and complete the assignment, and good luck.